Guys, intro time.
Wait, which intro?
The wisdom check.
Oh, good.
Wait, no. I thought we were keeping the old intro. What's wrong with the old one? People like that one.
It was too long.
Yeah.
Too many fucking gifs.
Yeah. But can we keep the part where I yell more?
No.
But it's the intro to end all intros.
I got like what? 2 lines last time?
Do you want more lines, Tim?
Well, no, not really.
In a world without answers.
Yeah.
Wait, do you want to start with that?
Here we go, exactly like last time.
Wait, okay, so we're doing it the exact same way? Let's start with the Smoky Bar.
No, it's a new season. We have to have a new intro.
More.
Not sure why we thought this would go any differently.
Oh, well. Welcome, everyone, to the Wisdom Check, where Jeff and Dustin welcome a guest every week to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Welcome.
This is ridiculous. I'm starting the stream now.
Wait, where's my die at? Well, we can't start until I botch, and it's not an intro unless I botch it.
You're on.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Wisdom Check. I am Dustin. With me on the other side of the screen over there is Jeff.
Hey.
And seated in the seat of honor tonight, our guest is Gregory from 1 in 20 D&D, which is a daily vlog that he does on YouTube. So we'll talk to him a little bit more about that. But getting started out here tonight, Greg, first off, say hello to the crowd and the audience out there.
Hey, thank you very much for having me, Dustin and Jeff. This is a real treat and honor. I'm super glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
We're super glad to have you. So, as we typically like to do with a lot of our guests, we like to hear a little how you got started in gaming in general. And this is one of the rare times where we're going to talk to somebody who's been gaming longer than we have.
Yeah.
So, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about how you got started in the hobby?
Yeah, absolutely. Back in 1974, the game that I love, Dungeons and Dragons, became official, and I was also born. So I'm kind of tied to it in some weird mystical way or something like that. And it's funny, I've been thinking a lot about this recently, as I kind of reflect on things. I was saying for a long time that I'm pretty sure I started when I was about 10 years old. But recently I realized that the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon came out in 1983. And if that's the case, I probably was more like 8-ish, maybe, when I actually started, because I pretty much started right about the time the cartoon started. Wow. I got the red box game, and I still have the red box game. However, I'm missing some of the pieces, through the years. Unfortunately, bits of it have gone by the wayside.
Hey, thanks for the raid there. Dragons in the Dining Room, one of our stream team partners, just came in with 11 people, so thank you guys. Appreciate it. Sorry to cut you off with that. You gotta
not at all. That's totally awesome.
Always gotta thank the raids when they come in. So.
For sure.
So wow, you got started right off the bat with the cartoon.
Just out of curiosity, when you watch the cartoon, were you like, man, this cartoon is so awesome, I gotta go find out more about this? Because I watched the cartoon at the time, I didn't know there was a game associated, so I just thought it was a cartoon.
Of course. And so there were also actually there were commercials for Dungeons and Dragons.
Nice.
So the red box there was a commercial for it on TV, and I had seen those, and I don't even know how I ended up getting the game. I don't know if it was something I asked for, or if it was something my parents saw that I had an interest and it was a popular thing, so they're like, here, check this out. But we ended up, I have a younger brother. He's only about a year and 4 months younger than me. So we grew up together, right? I mean, we're best buds. We still game together to this day. This is 35-ish years later, right? So yeah, I started with the red box. My earliest memories of actually playing were that there's a great comic book, a graphic novel comic book called ElfQuest.
Yep, that's okay. I remember that one.
Right? So here's my sort of vague memory. The cartoon came on. I got interested in it. I got my hands on a red box. And then one day at lunch at like middle school, I saw some kids sitting at a table throwing dice. And I'm like, hey, are you guys playing D&D? And they're like, yeah, we are. Like, wow, I know that. I want to try it. Can I play? And they're like, sure, grab a seat.
Nice.
And that's literally that's sort of how I've always thought of Dungeons and Dragons. It's
incredible.
like, to me, and not just D&D, I mean most TTRPGs from my perspective have always been this thing of like, yes, grab a seat. Because for me, it's like the more the merrier, of course, to a point. Because if you get like past 6 or 7, it gets out of control.
Oh man, we've had parties of 11 in some of our old games. Like I know exactly where you're coming from.
Right.
Luckily, we weren't great storytellers then, so it didn't matter as much. But
Totally.
But yeah, it is pretty cool that was that acceptant. I think back to when we were going through school. Maybe it was a different atmosphere a little bit, but I would have loved to just come up to a table and be like, "Hey, let's play." Like I felt like we kind of had to go like around, find people like clandestinely behind the bleachers. Like, what are you guys doing back here?
It was almost like you kind of had to almost be like initiated into the group a bit, because like people didn't want to openly talk about it. But we're talking about the 90s, so in the 80s, like you almost maybe early 80s or kind of before the Satanic Panic really kicked in. So maybe it was a little more accepted then, before everyone's mom started cracking down on them a bit.
Well, I should probably qualify some of that. So I probably started by just goofing with the red box and having no idea what I was doing, right? Like, oh, let's make a map. Okay, that's cool. How do you do characters? What's that all about? So I really didn't actually start playing with the red box. That was just what introduced me to it. Then I saw these kids at school that were playing, and they were playing actually 2nd edition by that point. Or sorry, excuse me. I'm sorry. That's not right. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons by that point.
Yeah, still 2nd ed, just AD&D.
Yeah, exactly. There we
same
go.
vein.
So,
yeah.
Right. So, and I should say, when I'm saying qualified, like I was a total outcast. Like I was not one of the cool kids by any stretch. I was a freak, geek, whatever you want to call it. I was certainly on the outside of whatever the inside group was. I was not part of it. And for me, like, there was like so many layers of that. I was one of the new kids in the school. I was like the smallest kid in the grade, and all of kind of like stacks against me. And and the kids that played it were certainly the most intelligent kids in the school, and also were sort of geeky, nerdy, slightly outcast kids themselves. They were certainly not jocks or anything like that. So I went through some of that. And then, so in middle school, I got to play a bunch. Not all the time. We did have a club in our school library where we played a handful of times. Nice. I even got to play a cool game called Toon.
Yep.
We played Toon. Baxton game, right?
Yes, we know about Toon.
That's awesome. And so that was sort of my intro. And then I just kept playing through all of my life. Like, between 8th and 9th grade, so right before I went into freshman high school, my family moved from Connecticut to California. And so here I am in a new state. I don't know anybody. And so when I was a freshman in high school, I used to bring a set of dice with me and some graph paper, and I would literally sit in class and roll characters. Just because, like, roll some stats, like what would this race be? What would this class be? And just like that was my thing, because it kept me from going crazy. Well, one day my friend, the guy I mentioned just before we started the stream, my best friend Brett, he became the GM for me for years and years. Well, we were in math class together, and one day either he or I had a book out before class started, and we just like struck up this conversation of like, oh, hey, you play games? And we're like, oh yeah, great. And then the rest is history, as we say. And now 30-ish years later, we are still friends, and we still play games, D&D and Car Wars and Battletech and all these other crazy tabletop games together.
It's a really powerful thing, like for friendships, because there's a lot of things you can do together. You can play sports together, you can play video games together, and that kind of stuff. But this is kind of that rare thing where you have that team environment. You also have that experience of like, it's not like, remember that time you did this thing, or my character did this thing. It's, you remember that time we did this thing, right?
That's a great way to say it, for sure.
It sticks with you. I don't know. Like I feel like our relationship as friends is very tight as a result.
Yeah, it's one of the things that you never really outgrow it in a way. Like that's one of the things that, like, you can play sports when you're younger. Like me and my fraternity brothers, every year we'll have like a little basketball game, and like it takes me about 20 minutes to realize I can't do the things I did in college anymore, like not without paying for it for a few days. So like that became something that we just can't go do all the time anymore like we used to. You know, video games, if everyone doesn't have the same systems or you're not playing the same game online, you can't really play with each other necessarily the same way that you used to when we used to sit around and play 007 all the time at Jeff's house. Like, but so, you know, tabletop role-playing games, it's changed how we do it with Roll20, but we're able to still continue to do it, you know, well into adulthood. So it's kind of cool that it is one of those hobbies that you can really just keep forever once you get into it.
Yeah, and some of that is the creativity of it, obviously. You know, like when you're playing something like a video game, you have what the video game gives you. You know, but
sure,
you know, as you get older, the game, you know, the quality of the game, you know, whether it's the graphics or whatever, degrades relative to what you're used to, and the story's the same, and you as a person, you mature, so you're looking for different things, and a video game can't keep up with that without, you know, new publisher or whatever. Whereas with our games, we can adapt them to what fits our group in this particular case, and I think that's
totally
the secret sauce.
They're dirt cheap.
I mean, for sure.
Yeah, one person buys a book and 7 other people can just walk up with a piece of paper and a pencil and play a game. Like, instead of dice, pass it around if you have to. Like, bare minimum, you're in for $10, you know, and you're good to go. Once you know what you're doing. Like,
absolutely. And to Jeff's point too, that's actually really interesting because with the group of my friends that I've been playing with since high school, right? It's my brother and a couple other buddies that we started in high school. We still get together. Well, it was like fewer and farther between through our 20s into our 30s. Then with virtual tabletops and with things like Google Hangouts and Discord and all this kind of stuff, now it's like totally rekindled our friendships and our ability to get together, even if it's just a couple, 3, 4, 5 times a year. We can still do that because of this. And not only that, what you just said, Jeff, too, is awesome. One of the things I realized, so I was about to move to California about 5 years ago, from California about 5 years ago. I was going to move to Florida. And that's when I found out about Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds and all these other things. Because I had not played for a long time. And I'm like, you know what? I need to go find a game. So I went to a local game store. And at that time, everybody was playing 4th edition, which I actually thought was pretty cool. I got into 4E, started going kind of like once a week or whatever. And then that led me to think like, wow, I want to play, but how am I going to get going? And I found out about virtual tabletops, and I found out about Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds. And so I did some research, settled on Roll20, found a game, tried it out. I'm like, this is great. Called up my friend or sent an email to my friends. I'm like, you guys, we got to do this. Check it out. We can play. We can do our games again. And it doesn't matter because like my brother lives in Singapore and one of my friends lives in Colorado. And now I'm down here in Florida, and it doesn't matter. So that was epic. On top of that, like you said about maturing, that group of friends, we will play like, let's say we play combat style games. So like we like Warhammer and we like Car Wars and we like Battletech and all these kind of like simulation styles. So even our D&D tends to be more hack and slash, which is fun for us. That's what we like doing.
It's good, man.
Right?
It's good.
Well, so what happened was I started getting more connected with the virtual game stuff. I started playing Roll20, and then things like Critical Role, Dice Camera Action, and all these big streams started happening. And I was like, whoa. And it kind of opened this whole new world to me of what role-playing could look like.
Yeah.
And it completely changed how I play. Completely. Because I love talking in character. I love using voices and coming up with crazy, zany things to say in character. And so speaking in character was nothing that group ever did. We just didn't do it. We talked in third person, or like, my character does this, my character says that. And when I saw people playing the game first person, was like a revolution for me.
Isn't that amazing? You know, it's interesting hearing this because we touched on this a little bit in some of our other talks that, you know, people get a model of the game in their head based on what they're used to. You know, like for us, I think we started out kind of more on that side that you're talking about, the hack and slash, more talking to third person, that kind of stuff. And I think we blended in early on. Last week's topic was about LARP as our DM Levi, Dustin and I started doing LARP stuff. And we started picking that up. We have some people in our group that are more into acting and that kind of thing. And it, you know, became the norm that way. And it's interesting to see things kind of flip all the way to that side with Critical Role and these podcasts coming out, where it's the concept of the simulation is now kind of the like weird niche thing on the side. And I think it's interesting because there's definitely should be a balance to those things, you know, because it's a role-playing game. You know, so those two words are really important. And I think a lot of times people try to like go completely one way or the other. And if that's your game style, great, you know, knock yourself out, do what makes you happy. But I think there's just so much to offer in both sides of that, you know, it's sad when people don't get their feet wet, you know, in both those sides, I guess.
Totally. Yeah, well, and it's fine. I think so. That's one of the cool things about being able to move from table to table by finding groups on Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds or whatever we're going to use, or even just like going to a different game shop and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Because like playing with the same guys for years and years, I know their styles. We could pick up a game tomorrow and I know we're going to have a blast no matter what game we're playing. And I'm okay with them not really getting into character and stuff. Mm-hmm. I will now. Now I'm going to do it because I freaking love it.
How do they react to it?
You know, the funny thing about that is 2 of them have actually joined one of the games that I'm playing on the rate. So let me tie this into part of what got me into YouTube and streaming and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, let's do it.
That's where we were going to go next anyway.
Right on. Perfect. So about the same time that I started getting exposed to like, oh, there's this whole virtual tabletop thing that we can get and use. And then when there was other I watched a bunch of other YouTube stuff, like probably Acquisitions Incorporated and a couple of others before Critical Role was even a thing. Mm-hmm. And because I was trying to learn about Roll20 for one thing, like how the heck do you use this?
There's a bit of a learning curve. Yeah.
Right. And then I also saw like, oh, other people are doing this streaming thing. That looks cool. And I had already done YouTube stuff, but it had nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay.
Nothing to do with gaming. And so I was like, oh, that's cool. I want to do that. And that sort of led me from one thing to the next into like, okay, I'm going to start a YouTube channel. And with with Roll20 and these virtual games, I got connected with people who like both sides. So I started playing a game when I first started Roll20. I found a group and a few of us hit it off. The DM was kind of not a good fit, and so we stepped away from him, but a few of us stuck together and kept playing together. Mm-hmm. That game sort of morphed and changed. I ended up getting to be the DM, which also was a totally new experience for me, so that's been crazy.
That's good.
And here we are a couple years later where I had asked Brett, my DM, hey, why don't you join this game? I need a stable player who is, you know, going to be there consistently, so we actually have enough players to have a game, which is still a challenge because we're all adults. And he got in and I'm like, cool, that's been great for about a year. And then I'm like, you know what? It would be great to have one more player that's also consistent and I can trust and is reliable. And so one of my other buddies from that high school game group, actually, he and I started playing after college, like in our early 20s. Mm-hmm. So he just joined over the Christmas break. So now 2 of the guys that I've been playing with for years who never really did any role playing, because I get into character and I talk in character, they're doing it a little bit. And they're both pretty darn good at it, which is really fascinating.
That's all it takes, you know, just a little ice breaking, you know, making it normal.
And that's the thing too, like you can't role play by yourself very well when it comes to that part. Like when you ask someone a question, they have to respond. Like you're initiating it in that way. Like it's sometimes some players don't care for it much because they feel like they get put on the spot that way. But like when you start trying to actually role play some of those things out, like people are saying like, oh crap, like I have to respond. I can't just be like Grog says no. Like it's
it just feels awkward at that point.
Yeah, it feels real awkward to say it that way. So then people just start doing it because they don't have any other choice, I guess.
Now, have you noticed that their like descriptions of things have changed as well? Or is that stayed basically the same?
That's probably something we've always been pretty great about. Like our games were always pretty descriptive of like the actual combat stuff.
Yeah, so very visceral because you're interested in that hack and slash. You got to make it flashy.
Oh yeah, like so one of my favorite memories, right, from games that we played through the years. We had a group that we went into a chamber filled with giants. So this is like big feasting hall for giants, and I had a character that levitated up above the floor thinking like, okay, I'm going to get a sort of a bird's eye view and start casting spells. And one of the giants basically pinned the character to the wall with a spear.
Oh.
So like, yeah, it was brutal and awesome and memorable. Like one of our characters was like hiding under the table for half the fight. It's just like, there's so many great memories like that through all these years. So graphic descriptions are fun.
Is it safe to say that when you started out, though, you guys were playing without maps?
That's an awesome question.
Because that has to do with a lot, I find, how much you describe things is how much visual aid is already on the table. Determines how much you explain.
I hadn't really thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right, Dustin. So we, for years, played Theater of the Mind. And then we started getting into like Warhammer. And so we started getting miniatures and we're like, hey, why don't we maybe use some miniatures when we're playing D&D just to give us a little bit of a visual? Because for me, it helped a lot because, it's just sort of the nature of the thing where, the DM describes something and you might picture it one way and they're picturing it another way. And sometimes that can get, that's where if we had arguments, those are the things we were having disagreements about. Like, no, wait a minute, I have line of sight on that one.
Once there's a map and there's miniatures, now it's like, nope, that's exactly where you put yourself. You're still sitting right there. There's no question about it. So,
yeah, that changed things a lot. And I don't know. I'm still a little on the fence with it because I've dove deeply into doing battle mat games, battle mat being Roll20 or whatnot. And yet I find myself now sort of longing for a little more of the theater of the mind, more fast paced. We're playing. So One Crit Wonder I saw popped in the channel there a minute ago. And every other Wednesday we're playing Tabletop Galaxy. And this is our Star Wars role-playing game where we're using Fantasy Flight games. And I absolutely love this system. It uses narrative dice, right? It's way different than D&D. It is. It's super fun. The first time I tried it, I'm like, I was like, what? But the first time it actually played, I was hooked right away. Yeah. And so it's interesting because the narrative system of dice really lends itself to not needing to have a battle mat at all.
Interesting.
And also the way they do range and movement. So they have range bands where you have engaged, which is part of short range, then medium, long, and extreme, which is pretty cool and so different than it's 5 feet, it's 10 feet.
Game. The newer game, a lot of the newer games are doing that.
The new Exalted one did.
Fantasy Flight games, new Exalted. A lot of the newer version of games coming out have gone to that system. So that's a more universal thing now, which is really cool. But yeah, you're definitely right. Like that Fantasy Flight game for Star Wars, the first time you play it, like I was rolling dice and DM Chuck from Defenders of Cobalt was running the game session, and I'm playing.
Awesome.
I'm a droid, and I'm rolling these dice. I'm like, all right, Chuck, what happened? Because I have no clue what the dice say. There's little glyphs and symbols on them. I'm like, all right, Chuck, so what just happened?
Well, for our audience sake here, and for mine, because I actually haven't seen the system, can we describe what what you're talking
Oh,
about
yeah, sure.
specifically, or what the mechanism is?
It's gonna sound. I'm just gonna warn people. This is gonna sound way more complicated than it is. But go ahead, Gregory. You've got more experience than me. You go ahead and lay into this thing.
All right, for sure. Yesterday, I actually, for the first time, did a one-shot with the Genesis system, which is essentially the same, but Genesis is the generic, like any theme, any genre role-playing game, whereas the Edge of the Empire and Age of Rebellion and all these are the very Star Wars specific. They both use the same basic concept, and that is that there are 3 dice on the positive side and 3 dice on the negative side, and they oppose each other. So you have one, so you can get a success or a failure. Those are the first sort of 2 dice, or 2 results.
2
I
results
guess.
on a die.
Let's call it on
is
a
what
die.
he should be saying. Not
That's
to
right.
confuse. These are
That's
not
correct.
separate dice. They're the results that are on the die themselves. So
Okay.
like when you start with a D4, one is success, one is fail, and the other 2 are other things.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, so there's, on the positive side, you have success, advantage, and triumph. And on the negative side, you have failure, threat, and despair. And what those represent have different results depending on the situation. And the first 2, the first 4, I should say, rather, are opposed. So like a success is canceled out by a failure. So if I roll 1 success and 1 failure, there's no result.
Gotcha.
Same thing with advantage and threat. If I roll 1 advantage and 1 threat, there's no result. Despair and triumph are the only ones that, no matter what, they still count. And a triumph includes a success, and a despair includes a failure.
Okay.
So they're kind
again,
of
like
a critical.
exactly,
Yeah.
and like
Kinda.
Dustin said, it sounds way more complicated than it is once you
So-
start playing.
What you're doing is you're picking up based on your stats a number of dice, and those dice basically start out like D4s, and you
Okay.
roll them, and they come up with number of successes, threats, fails, and then what happens is as your character gets better at things, you upgrade to a D6, and you upgrade to like a D8 to a D12, and they have different numbers of those various things on them. So then, like if I want to help his character, I upgrade his die by giving up mine, so then he has a better chance because I helped him. So by giving up mine, he then. But like sometimes all you roll is the narrative stuff, just threats and stuff. So then it's like this weird GM just kind of has to read the dice, if you will, and just narrate what happens after that. So it's a real interesting system. Not that I want to get too much into FFG alone, but it's a whole separate set of dice too. You can play with normal dice. You have to get the dice for the system. So
It's just interesting
it's
if it's the
required.
degrees of success and failure that's causing the creativity, or if it's specifically the structure of how they're doing it.
It's both, I think. At least
so?
from what I've experienced,
Yeah, it's a little
it
of
seems to be both. And it
Interesting.
just ties back to what we were talking about was the battle maps, right? So did we start with battle maps? The answer was no. But then once we started playing other games like basically Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40K, and we started like finding out about miniatures and painting miniatures and all that, then we slowly started incorporating that into D&D, but not all the time. So I do like the theater of the mind.
Yeah,
and
there's a
it just
pendulum
depends on
there.
the system.
You know, there is some of that, like, because there's no reason why you can't include both to varying degrees. Like, I think the maps do an excellent job of taking out the ambiguity. You know, taking the broad strokes and saying, here's where things are. You know, if you need to know what's going on, you can look at it between your turns, you know what's happening. But
Exactly.
it's not as good if you don't layer on creative, cinematic descriptions, because people can zone out and lose interest in the scene. And so, like, I think that the best games are the ones where you're seeing that people are really integrating both, at least for me. And maybe I'm a specific snowflake that likes battle maps a lot. But I like the map and I like the descriptions. I like when they come together nicely and, add flavor on top of what is nice and consistent ground.
I feel like they're both tools that I have in my toolbox. And as someone who GMs or DMs, and I did this recently with my Zweihander game, almost all of the combats in my Zweihander game have been loosely theater of the mind. I have a battle map that lets them, it's not a map, it's a mat. I call it that. But it has like engaged, ranged, extreme range, like layered out, so they can just put themselves where they technically are in the scheme of battle. But this most recent combat, the one inside the church, there were so many NPC combatants and so many players and so many enemies, it required an actual map. I could no longer. You hit max capacity for what you can keep track of in your head as a DM or GM, and what the players can possibly fathom. That it finally hit a mass combat where it was like, it's got to go on a map. There's no other way. So for the first time, I broke down and made a map for the game. Like,
hey, thanks for
you know what's funny? That's hysterical, because I actually decided Monday nights I've been running a game for a little while. I realized last year, I'm like, I need a real face-to-face game. And so I just happened, like, this is how things work, right? I'm wearing a Dungeons and Dragons t-shirt one day, and I like climbing, so I'm going to the local climbing gym where I had a membership last year, and this guy in the gym's like, hey, cool shirt. And I'm like, dude, do you play? And so we hit off this conversation where it turned out he actually had never played, but he had bought the books and thought it was cool and wanted to try it out. So one thing leads to another, and me and a couple of the guys from the gym get a game together. Well, long story short, lives change. One guy moves to Colorado, and that guy that had seen me originally, he ended up, him and his wife had a baby. So it was like, roll 20? Like, yeah, okay, cool. We're going to move it to roll 20. So fast forward a little bit, I started streaming the games now on my Twitch channel, and I actually, but just before we started tonight, was actually editing session 1. So I'm going to try to start posting those to the YouTube channel. So these guys are so funny. We added two other players. So there's a total of 4 players, and one of them is a gnome and an illusionist, and likes Fireball.
Naturally.
And that is a solution that he comes to frequently. Well, they ended up, I'm running Princes of the Apocalypse, and they're in, if you know anything about it, they're in this keep called Riverguard Keep. And so he blows off a fireball, pretty much let the whole place know what's going on, or subsequent rounds, the alarm gets sounded. And so they pretty much, it's like 4 against a whole bunch of combatants. Sure. And it got to the point where it was so complicated that I realized, like, our next session, I think I'm going to do Theater of the Mind, because I don't want to keep having to move things around on roll 20 because it takes so darn long. That got to be a little cumbersome.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. Yeah, I mean, I could see that as a definite pro. When you just want to have volume just for the sake of weight, you want it to bear down on the players. You don't need the nitty gritty detail of it. You need the general sensation of that. What I think is interesting though is that like when I was playing Exalted with the guys, they're using that system, like the close, the short, the distant, and the long, or whatever, and it works super well when it's me versus you. But then when you have multiple combatants, suddenly it's like, well, what am I distance-wise relative to that person? I moved over here, so now where am I relative to those people? Like, trying to keep track of that as a DM was like impossible. So I don't know, like it felt like a weird system that's trying to do both things. And for me, it didn't fit my style, I guess, but I liked everything else about their combat engine. So
yeah, that makes sense. It doesn't work in every situation. Like, the more complex the combat gets, the more challenging it is to not use. Even with that range band kind of system, you still get to a point where you're kind of like, you need to get a visual sense maybe of how things are laid out. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and some systems just require it. Like, they really, really do. Like, we talk about Pathfinder that way. Like, I can't imagine running Pathfinder combat narratively. Like, some things just would completely go out the window, like, because you would never use them. They'd never get done correctly. I feel that way about a lot of our early games with range combat. I remember the first time I played on a map where suddenly I realized just how badass bows and arrows were.
Yeah. That's the reason they got used.
Totally. This is true, though. Like, I remember, like, the first time I was playing over at my friend Bill's house, who lived down the street, actually, from Jeff, when we both lived up in Champaign-Urbana. And I'll go over to this game, and he sets up this battle map, right? And he gets tokens out for all of us, and I didn't think too much about it. My guys were both, we were playing 2 characters apiece. We're both pretty much melee. And I remember the first time he sets them down there, and he puts across the battlefield like 200 some goblins. I was like, all right, goblins, this is going to be a heyday. I'm going to kill like 5, 6 a swipe. This is going to be great. And then they all unleashed crossbows in one round. And it was like, we didn't even get halfway across the map. We were all done for. So
You did.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just the first time you realize, like, they got to shoot at me how many times before I get there? Like, ooh.
Yeah, it makes a
We
difference.
just didn't have that in our theater of the mind. We just couldn't. We could never make that happen the same way.
No, it's interesting how much the things that go on your sheet seem to really depend on the structure of the game, right? So, like, if it is a very theater of the mind game, you're going to have a very different structure to how you build your character. And that kind of brings us around to our original topic. We're going to talk about character builds and character creation.
I was going to say the same thing too, because that actually connects a lot to your style of play, maybe. Because it's funny. It's so funny you mentioned ranged weaponry too, because that's sort of one of my, like, I don't know if it's a pet peeve or if it's just my personal preference. Like I'm always frustrated when I see a player that has a character that like as soon as things go to ranged combat, they're like, oh well, I'm out of the game. And I'm like, you don't have a javelin? You don't have a dagger? What do you mean you're out of the game? Or like that's sort of their attitude. I'm obviously exaggerating for emphasis, but that's sort of the attitude of like, oh, I can't. Well, I'm screwed when we go to range.
I blame popular TV shows. They don't do enough of showing characters the way adventuring characters really are. You always see the guy walk around with a big giant two-handed sword. And that's all he owns.
All right.
He's not walking around with 5 javelins over the other shoulder. And even when you see people draw their characters or when you see art done for characters, there's no ranged weaponry on the melee guy.
Fair enough.
I think it's internal view of your character, right? So, like, I think a lot of people get in their head, like, I want to play Conan the Barbarian. What's Conan doing? He has a big-ass sword or a big-ass axe, and he's just bad, Oh, I want to play King Arthur. Cool, so you're a sword and board guy. Awesome. You have Excalibur, right? That's your shtick. I don't ever see you with a bow and arrow, right? So, like, I think there's just, like, these quintessential concepts that come through, and when a person sits down to make their character, they have one in mind, usually. And so, like, the generalist is one of those tropes, I guess, but I don't think it's the trope that everyone defaults to.
Yeah,
that's a really good point.
Yeah, I just think that people come into the hobby from some other pop culture reference. And so they bring that with them, whether it's He-Man, whether it's, all those other different types of fantasy things they could be into. If you're watching The Witcher, and you're watching Geralt do his thing, he ain't got no range. He has like one crossbow I think he uses in like one scene or something, maybe. That's like all you ever see of it.
Yeah, to be fair, he has some magic. But
yeah, but I mean, the point was like, you never see him. He always closes range, no problem, right? So
totally.
You get this idea that it can always be done, and then you throw yourself onto a map. And if your DM is like ours and he likes maps that are like 5 miles wide, got a lot of movement sometimes to get across that field, suddenly cover, things like that become a little more important.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess that comes down to like what people are trying to get out of their character when they make a character, right? So, like, with the games we're primarily playing these days, Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or something in that kind of vein, you're looking at that heroic hero kind of play and, that kind of standard fantasy tropes. So, your mages and your fighters and your big dumb brutes and your sneaky thieves and that kind of stuff. So, like, I think when you sit down to first make your character, like, I guess what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Like, where do you start with conceptualizing what you're going to build?
Well, I have this is why I thought this would be a great topic, because I definitely take different approaches to character development and creation, I think, than a lot of people do. And that is to say that I generally come at it from many different directions. And so, like, sometimes it will literally be I know I'm going to play in a game. I know what the party balance is. Like, I know what the other players are playing. And so it comes down, I'm like, okay, we're missing this or we're missing that role. And I'm like, okay, cool. What could I build that might fit in that role? Right. Other times, like, I think there's a certain level of what is a person trying to get out of the game, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe equally so, what do they enjoy most about the game? Some people are all about numbers and the mechanics, and they love the crunch, right?
Mm-hmm.
Other people are all about the RP and the story and the narrative. And it's funny because I've found that for myself, this is one of those things about maturing that we were sort of talking about, is I found for myself, I actually love like kind of all of it. So I enjoy the crunch to a degree. I like finding a really cool combo that I want to try and then just building a character around that. Like, well, what if I took this feat and I had this weapon? What would that look like? And I'll give you a perfect example. There's a fantastic movie called Musa the Warrior. It's a Korean movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the main like hero in the movie uses a spear, and it's a long spear, and he tears it up with this weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a martial artist, right? So I've always had issues with combat. In any game I play, I'm always like, what? That's not real. It doesn't work that way. Why can't I use two weapons that are exactly the same in each hand? I mean, that's perfectly natural. And I get it. The mechanics and balance and all that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like that's been one of my funny, just silly pet peeves with 5e of like, they're using a spear as this like short little thing, but that's not necessarily what a spear is.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to go to things like a glaive or a pike, and then it sort of starts making sense. So one thing I might do is like I wanted to create, and I didn't really have any success with this because I tried a couple different combinations. It was just something, an interesting, I guess, exercise is like, okay, what if I was going to make a fighter that specialized with a long spear, which I should have used a pike now that I think about it, or for sure like a glaive or something and just reskinned it.
Mm-hmm.
But when I originally started doing it, I didn't give myself that permission.
Right.
So like 3 years ago, maybe even a year ago, like reskinning something to me, that would have been like what I would have called homebrewing.
Okay.
Right.
Okay,
And
yeah.
that to me always felt like, I don't want to homebrew. I want to stick to the books. I'd rather just keep
Gotcha.
things simple.
Yeah.
And now I kind of understand because I've, I don't know whether it's through just exploring my own ideas through the vlog and watching other videos and all these kind of things where I've gotten this sense of like, it's okay to reskin things. All you have to do is talk to the GM.
Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
like, hey, I want to play this character, but I want it to look like this.
We had that issue come up in our 5e game with my Trident.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a lot of
I
time
love
looking
Trident.
to figure out if Trident fell under Spear or if it fell under Polearm, because those are two
Nice.
very different mastery feats. So when I was thinking about if I wanted Spear Mastery or Polearm Mastery for my Trident, I was like, all right, Levi, which one is it?
Mm-hmm.
I think we finally settled on Spear, and then I didn't take the feat. But nonetheless, I thought about it heavily. And I made him decide then on what it is in case I pick it up later. But those are the kinds of things where you talk about reskinning. If you wanted it to be like a spear, yeah, you take your glaive if you want the polearm mastery mechanics, and then it looks like a spear. Who cares? Like that's just how you draw your character at the end of the day. So those are, I guess, if you're going to focus on the mechanics part of your character, that's a good way to approach it.
Yeah, totally. And I like to, so now because I've gotten to this point, I like to blend the two. I like to have mechanics that are fun and interesting to play.
Yep.
Because it is a game, right?
Yep.
I like to game the game a little bit still, get the right feats, get the right stats, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And I also love, because I love the RP side. See, so one of the things that I do when I approach character creation is I really like to flip tropes on their head. I don't like to follow tropes. I prefer to go like completely the opposite direction. Another great example I will use right now, and part is another fun thing. Oh gosh, I have to calm myself down because I'll go off on.
Wait a minute, you gotta take a second.
We'll pull
do some
it back
breathing.
Right, breathe it, calm it down. I love doing voices, as I mentioned. So there are times when a character will literally spring out of just a voice that pops into my head that I was just goofing around. I'm like, oh, wow, that would make a perfect blank. Other times it goes the other direction. So I at this point, I've pretty much played all of the classes, all the standard classes. The last two I had to give a try were Rogue and Warlock.
Wow.
Through all the years, I generally would play like a Paladin or a Ranger. I love the fighter classes. I've dabbled in magic users and clerics and that kind of thing. I've done multi-class, but Rogue and Warlock were sort of the last two to get to. So a couple years back, I was going to get into a game, and I decided I was going to play a Rogue. I decided I wanted to play a high elf rogue. And so when I started thinking about this character, when you in my opinion, it's just how I see it. I feel like most people think of a high elf. When they think of a high elf, they think of like a magic user. They think of a caster, typically.
Yeah, I can see that.
I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm going to make a high elf that's a rogue, and the high elf rogue is going to be an arcane trickster.
Okay.
So here's the thing. As we kind of like move into this discussion of character creation, I'm going to keep coming back to this one thing. And what I've realized, especially in doing all the vlog topics, as I sort of develop my concepts, my ideas, and share these ideas so other people might be able to use them, I've realized that I always come back to why.
Right.
Why?
Yeah. Why?
Why?
Question. Yeah.
So I realized I'm going to play a rogue. Cool. What kind of rogue? I tried a dwarf. I liked that. The dwarf I made was sort of a dungeon crawler, right? Like really good in a dungeon. Not every game is like that. Then I thought about, okay, what about a high elf? And what about an arcane trickster? Okay, why is he an arcane trickster? Well, if most high elves are at least have some aptitude with magic, what if he was at the academy or he was being trained as a mage when he was a kid, but for whatever reason, something happened and he got kicked out. Or he failed out, or for some reason, he could no longer be that mage. He couldn't be a wizard because he stole something, or he got caught up in something, or whatever. And so that veered him off into this life of being a rogue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that created the mechanics. That created the foundation.
Yeah. Why the
other
thing there? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
The other thing I did with this character, which is I love doing this kind of thing as well. I feel like, again, to try to break tropes, right? It seems to me like most of the time, if someone does a high elf, it tends to lean into like a British accent or like an aristocratic accent or manner of speaking, right? So I happen to be watching Into the Badlands, which is a cool series, right?
Great show.
And like I really got into this thing. I'm like plantation owner, Louisiana, Southern drawl, something. And so I took this high elf, and his name is Day Salka, and he talks a lot like this. He's a very proper gentleman, but he is in fact a high elf. His ears are in fact pointed. But he does not probably talk like any high elf you might have met in the past. So I love to just throw things around like that. Like, what if a halfling, halflings are bubbly and cheerful and maybe high strung and that kind of thing. But what if you made a halfling that was hi, I'm Jimmy.
Jimmy the
totally go against whatever. Just I love doing things like that.
Yeah, it's good to flip on that. Like we've talked about this a little bit about in the LARP episode, is that there is a certain amount of breaking tropes that's important, just because you don't want things to get too stale. And so it's always good that there are some of those little things kind of coming up to freshen things up. But it's not to say also that tropes don't serve a purpose. Sometimes leaning into a trope is a really good thing that people actively avoid all the time. It makes these divergences from them less special, I guess, less nuanced. And it's interesting because you're saying your approach is coming from different angles. I think that's a lot of how I do it too, because I think it all comes down to what the motivation of the player is that's creating the character. If you really enjoy just the role play and the character voices and the description, that's probably where you're going to start. And if you don't like the game part of the game, you're probably not even going to think about that. It's just going to be like, oh, I have to pick some stuff. Cool, I picked some things. Or, you could be on the flip side and all you care about is the game stuff. And you get done building your character exactly how you want. And you go, shit, I got to come up with a name. I guess he wears clothes. Like he's got a burlap sack. Done. But there's all these other ways you can kind of move into it, like you said. And one of the things I like to really do, and what I really enjoyed at the LARP, is I like to sit down with somebody, figure out what they're into, work on that part. And then as they're kind of getting energized and they're really diving into that subsection of character creation, I like to flip it to whatever the opposite is and then talk about okay, why are we doing this or that? Why are we picking that feat? Where did that come from in your story? What does that say about you as a person? Or vice versa, oh, you're this type of person, so what's a feat that would fit that? How do we implement that in a way that makes sense for the character?
Approach.
And you just go back and forth.
I think that's the important part, is that no matter which way you approach your character, whether you approach it from the mechanical part first or the concept part first, you have to push from both directions till you hit in the middle of both, or at least push from one end until you find yourself answering questions that lead you into the other half of it. Yeah. For me, it's all based on who my DM is. If I know my DM, if I know my DM, I know what kind of game they're going to run. I know which concept. Okay, let me restart. At any point in time, I have about 5 to 10 character concepts in my head for future games.
Yeah, guilty as charged.
Everyone does this. I don't put them on paper. I'm not a paper first person. They're in my head. They already are alive, breathing people in my head. Bowron was one of those people at one point. He didn't quite have a name yet, but I knew I was going to play one when I got an opportunity. I just had to wait for the right game to come around. Mm-hmm. I can't waste those concepts that I put that kind of mental energy on DMs who I know are not going to let me role play. If this is a pure X's and O's map wargaming style battle, I will keep those concepts in the back of my head, roll up something, play with a mechanic that I haven't gotten to do before, and approach it from a mechanical aspect. If I know that's the game I'm getting into, that's what I do.
Yeah, one-shots are great for that.
Yeah, one-shots are fantastic. I have a bard, a 5e bard based on Michael Jackson in my head, and I want to play it sometime, but it's one-shot material. It's not a long campaign. It'll never appear in Levi's game, but it'll happen someday in a one-shot. But nonetheless, when I do get an opportunity where Levi's all right, guys, I'm ready to run another game, I dig into one of those 10 to 15 concepts that I've had roll around in my head for who knows how long, and I pluck one of them out that feels right for his campaign. And I know when I do that immediately, I'm starting from the other end. Which game system are we using? How am I now going to make a character sheet that reflects this person that I've created in my head? And it may not be the most tactically sound thing in the world where he starts out at, but that's where he's starting out because that's who I've created.
That's cool.
His flaws, everything that come with it, come right along with it. And I don't give two shits what the rest of the party's playing. That's what I'm playing. That's just how I do it. That's what I'm going to play. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah,
that's how it should. I like those games. I love that approach too, because a balanced party is sort of a myth, right? And ultimately, if you have a solid DM, you don't really need it.
That's true.
There's always ways around.
And that's again, it starts with the DM.
That's a good
point. Because I
totally.
know I can sit at the game shop where I was working on my Zweihander game, and there was a Starfinder game. They were making characters, and they're over there making these characters, and they're having these long discussions about I was going to play this, I was going to play that, so I guess I won't play this. And I'm like, no, play it. If none of you are the healer, don't be over there making up a healer just because someone has to quote unquote play it. Your DM can throw enough potions at you, stim packs, whatever game has to offer, wands. Throw it out there; it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true in the case. Sorry to cut you off there.
No, go ahead, Jeff.
I think it's definitely the case if players are filling a role because they have to but don't want to. That's a negative. Whereas for me, I enjoy the team aspect of it. I like the roles. I like filling the niche. I like niche protection so that somebody feels special in what they're doing. I like amplifying what somebody else is doing. So if you're the pirate guy, I want you to have all the fucking pirate moments you can get. If that means me being a pirate helps that, cool, I'll do that. If it means me not being the pirate guy and being the fall guy, that goes against you, clashes so that your personality strives, that's what I would rather do. And so it's the same thing with the roles. Like, yes, I do agree that a great DM can fix any imbalance in a party. If you don't have tanks, they can figure it out for you. If you don't have healers, they can figure that out for you. You don't have magic users, the game could adapt. But I think it's really something interesting, that the game provides. You have these different classes that do different things. And when you put them together in certain ways, you have a party that everyone feels good and special, Like they feel like I need to do my bit or something's not going to work out well. That means I'm important, So I don't know. I like that.
I think that's what makes you a good player. Mm-hmm. And it's also one of the things I love about this hobby the most. It's like the reason I love this hobby is the cooperative element of it. I'm with you 100%. I want to be in a game where the other players approach it as like a team. Like we're a team, whatever kind of team that is and however it looks. And even if we have challenges within the team, we're a team. And we're meant to like work together to overcome whatever odds are thrown at us. Like I'm 100% with that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's we talk a lot about
I'm
this.
like 75% with that.
Yeah, I figured you would be. Yeah,
I'm gonna say I'll work with you most of the time. Like
he's lying. He works with us about 25% of the time. He does his own thing 75% of the time. Right. And there's a place for that too. Like I think we've talked about this a little bit with the game being on its face. Dungeons and Dragons in particular, a team sport. Whereas say, hey, Merry Christmas, there, Insurgent. It's a little after the dates, but it's good. I'll take the cheer anyway. But with Dungeons and Dragons, it's specifically built around the team. Whereas something like we talked about Vampire the Masquerade last week, and that one's very much not a team sport. There are teams. You're probably on a team, but it's very individualistic.
I think Pathfinder and 4 were team oriented. 5th Ed, the more I play it, it's not.
It doesn't have to be. Yeah, that comes down to like the
mechanics don't lend
not the
to
theme. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
The mechanics don't lend to it. It's 5 individuals running around on a map. There's really not a lot of team aspects the way you got with Pathfinder or with some other games. But
so you're saying
still approach it
synergy.
as one.
That's what you're saying, like mechanical synergy.
Yes.
Yeah,
there's
none
not
of that.
mechanical synergy.
But
so
I think
you don't have to be that way, but you can approach it that way if you want to.
But I think the running principle of Dungeons and Dragons is you are a party of adventurers who work together to blah.
Yeah.
Fill in the blank.
Well, yeah, and that comes down to tone, right? The tone at the table, which is super important. I've kind of like just learned about this in the last 6 months or less, probably. In fact, so one of the things I loved and had a great experience with is when I finally did get to play a Warlock. I did it on one Crit Wonders channel. We were playing. It was our Icespire Peak game, which is, man, what a great group that was. Every player at that table was amazing, and One Crit Wonder is an incredible DM. So we had an awesome experience with that.
Good.
And Clay, the DM behind the screen, one of the things I really learned from him is this concept of how important the tone is for a game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just the tone of the game, I think. It's also the tone of like the players at the table, right?
Very much so.
Like if you guys know, because you've been with Levi for all these years, you've been friends for all these years, you've developed a level of trust.
Yes.
Where you can take those risks. You can go to that level. You can have infighting in the group because you know at the end of the game, you're all going to be friends.
Exactly.
So even if your characters bicker and maybe even come to blows, it doesn't really matter because it's just a game.
Yeah.
When you're at a new table with new people, maybe not the best time.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, you can't run every character concept with every DM. You have to know the DM. You have to kind of know the other players, get a little feel for them. I've always kind of under the impression that usually a DM gives every character at the table enough reason to work together, even if the character is not inclined normally to do so. There's usually things going on, and usually you have motivations to want to be there. sometimes you have to push a little harder to make your character motivated to be in certain situations, just depending, it kind of ebbs and flows a little. But for the most part, I always feel like there's usually a good enough reason for me to continue to work with these other people. Like, I don't need it to be artificially created. I want it to happen because he wants to be there. And I usually find good reasons to make it keep happening. So.
Yeah, I think that's
one of the things that makes a good player.
Yeah, exactly. That's we're going to say the same thing here, it looks like. But I think that is a key thing, is that, yes, you can assume that DM is going to do what they have to do to get you into the story and into the party. And they can do a lot of work to that to make sure it happens. But I think as a good player, as a player who is there to facilitate good gameplay, you have to start your character concept and say, why is my character an adventurer? Why is my character going to join a group instead of go solo? Why is my character going to give a shit about anything? You know, like, if an adventure hook happens, why would my character go? If I can't answer that, and I don't have a compelling answer, that's not a character that needs to be played. Stay home, write a book about it.
Well, I always think of it like this: like, most character concepts, especially with D&D 5e, you come in already partially baked into a group, not your party, not your adventuring party, but into some other group. A druid circle, a cleric church, a paladin's church. You have these other things, these ethoses, these other things that you come in as a part of. A wizard school. Like, you already have this built-in social structures your character's a part of. The question is what's going on that's caused him and these 5 other people to somehow end up in the same spot, in the same situation. Mm-hmm. And that drives it forward. I've always hated the idea of adventurers as a profession. Like, this is the only thing they ever do with their whole lives. That's reasonable. I hate the idea because, to me, it completely breaks the whole reality of what any world really is. Nobody's sitting around in taverns waiting for a job to go up on a board so they can run out together as a big giant group. Like, people don't even role play that in their actual games anymore whenever they're heavy role playing. Like, you almost never see that's how this party started out. Like,
you see it less,
something else. Like, it's always more story driven than that.
So it sounds like you prefer a game that's more more grounded.
Yeah,
like more realistic, even though it's
and I approach my characters from that method as well, definitely, for sure.
Yeah, I see that stance. I agree with it to a certain point, but I don't think that adventurers are typical people. Like, if you put an adventurer in the real world situation, like our world, like, what is an adventurer? Are they the dude who has a 9-to-5 job? No. Are they the person, working in a factory somewhere? No. Are they a family guy that has ties to home that they're not going to pack up and leave? No. So who are they? They're like military people. They're hippie backpackers, like it's Levi's saying down here. They're, people who are doing something that's really weird. Like, you don't live anywhere. You don't have a job. You go around looking for monsters to kill, finding things to solve. You show up in town briefly to get rearmed and fuck shit up and get drunk.
That is almost purely a D&D 5e stance. Every other game, Dungeon Crawl Classics, you're absolutely a peasant who has been suddenly rallied up to handle some situations. Zweihander, you can roll laborer as your profession to start out. Warhammer, you can be a laborer. Like, most of the other game systems out there, you're just regular. You're Luke moisture farming until one day you get swept up into something bigger that happens. I think
there are games that are more inclined to that. I agree with you. Like, if you're playing like a World of Darkness Mortal game, for instance, but Dungeons and Dragons is not that system.
Yeah, D&D is, like I said, kind of the one exception to it. It is the one that's a little more leans that direction. Oh yeah, definitely, for sure.
I gotta try Dungeon Crawl Classics too, because I've had this like fantasy for a while where I created a character that was a half orc, and I wanted to literally start the game with like nothing, no equipment, nothing, just race, class, go. And that was, for me, it was super fun concept of like, well, why did he become an adventurer? And the whole backstory, like creating that was awesome. But I feel like starting out a 0 level character would be right up my alley. I just haven't had a chance to try that
it's
yet.
So fun. You just missed out. We were just promoting it. He's in the channel, the Liching Hour. He just did a Lich's birthday bash birthday weekends ago, and he ran 11 of us through a DCC funnel, and it was hella fun.
I'll try it at some point here.
There's going to be more coming up. Don't worry. So
I want to come back to something Jeff was alluding to, though, too. Or actually, you were saying it, Dustin, but then Jeff and I were kind of probably trying to say something similar at the same time. So one of the things I feel like separates a casual gamer and a sort of, let's say, novice gamer from someone who's sort of like in their own way leveled up, right? To someone who's becoming a really good gamer, like someone I want to be at the table with, a player, is a person who understands that it's their responsibility to answer why and go along for the ride. Whatever the ride is, whatever the DM and the players, the other players at the table, and including the DM who is one of the players at the table, whatever the other players have kind of come to explore, we as players, if we're going to be good players, and we're going to be the kind of person that everyone is inviting to the table rather than saying, like, I never want that person around again. We have to engage. We have to actively find, okay, I made a hermit character who has spent the entire last 20 years meditating in the desert as a monk. Cool. Why are you in this party now? Because the reality is that person would probably never leave the desert.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. You have to really take your time. Oh, sorry. Yeah,
I just the thought is that you find the ways to tie yourself into whatever arrives.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you got to pick out what makes your character tick and how do they think. What motivates them, and that's the thing a lot of people fail to do, because there's nothing really on the sheet that says what does your character give a shit about. I mean, a little bit now in 5th ed, there are some systems that are finally putting these things in.
They finally did.
But that should be
those don't
50%
even talk to your motivation, though.
Yeah, they can.
Well,
they
give you a little bit.
Yeah.
Like I've got one for mine. The ship is what matters. The crew come and go. So that directly tells me how Bowron reacts to the crew versus how he reacts to the ship being in danger. They're very, how he views the crew and why it takes longer for him to bond to other crewmates is because he's used to crew changing every time they come to port. Some crew leaves, other crew come on. They're temporary people in his life. So he treats them that way until they stick around for a while. Then he kind of slowly clings on to them a bit. And that all came from what I rolled as my bond.
Sure, yeah. And I think that some of it, though, is that the sheets are not made in a way that really facilitates that. Or even the books. Like, if you crack open a book, you look at what's in there, it's like 90% combat rules, a little bit of, what is your fluff of your race and what your class says. And then there's 2 pages of oh, you should probably have a story, So I think because there isn't an emphasis on it, people don't really give it the time that they should. And I think when you're sitting down to make a character, yes, you should consider what will be fun to play. Yes, if you're interested in roles, you should consider that. Yes, you should look at your other players and say, hey, what is it they're trying to get out of the game? How can I make that happen? But I think beyond all that, you need to be able to sit down and look at your person and say, okay, who are they? How do they think that is different than the way I think? What does that mean once I apply it to the world? Okay, where am I at in this setting as a result of what I think and how I interact with things? And you should spend most of your character time, in my opinion, thinking of situations that you find yourself in. Just come up with a random scene. What would my character do in this scene? How would they respond to it? If a person was saying this to me, what would I say back? And if you start to fill in those blanks, you're so ready for game. You know who this person is. You know what they're going to do. And then you can codify that in little, phrases here and there. And the character will build itself off of that. You get your cool voice together. You throw it out there. You start interacting with the other players. And then this is something else I think is really important, is to add too many layers onto this cake. I think it's really important that once you make contact with the game and the other players, it's important to reassess. And if you need to make some tweaks here, there, or adjustments, make those fucking adjustments.
Especially if you're not making your characters as a group.
Yeah.
So many times, when I started my 5e game at the shop, most of those players, what they did was they didn't sit down with a character sheet and roll up stats. They didn't ask each other what they were playing. They got on their phone, went to D&D Beyond and said, oh, here's my Warlock they made months ago. I got to give it a name still, but is this sheet okay? Yeah, you can play that sheet. That's cool. And then they sat down and they started hearing what everyone else was, and they started figuring it out. Like, okay, so you're this and you're this and you're this. Okay, so here's what's going on. Here's what we're doing. And now we'll just start role-playing a little bit and see where it goes. And as the game went on, they kind of slowly found their niches a little bit, at least in the party character personality-wise, not so much mechanic-wise. They never did quite figure that out. But
So how much do you think it's worth having in a session 0 input from the other players for your own character?
For me personally, I think
need
it's
it.
really useful.
I think it's cool. I don't mind it when it happens. I do not require it
Right on.
for me.
I mean, I don't think it's a requirement, but I think that having it and utilizing it makes you better. I think it takes you up 10%.
I think it makes the DM better. I think the DM's more prepared for what he or she's going to be dealing with when players come to a table and you know who all the characters are, you know what their group mentality is and what they want to do. You can better fashion a story path out kind of in front of them a bit for them to start to wander down to get things going. I think that's better for the DM to have it. I think it's more useful for the DM to have session 0 than it is sometimes the players.
I mean, I could see it could be. But I do think that a session 0, for instance, like if we get into a group and I come into it and I'm like, man, I'm going to make a James Bond type character. He's going to be smooth. Nice. He's going to be stealthy. He's going to get in there. He's going to be a one-man show, do his thing. And then I come into the group and everyone else is like, it's captain team. You know, like we all have our role. Hey, we're good upstanding citizens. Well, maybe I need to bend my concept a little bit so that it works well. Or if I'm going to clash, at least that's an intentional thing that I'm deciding after knowing what's happening.
You're Black Widow on the Avengers.
Useless, yes.
Hey, wait a minute.
Hey, now.
Shots fired. But yeah, no, I think it's important to look at those dynamics too. Like if you get into a party and you know none of the characters like each other, that's not a party. It's not going to stick together. You know, totally. If everyone's sitting around going like, man, why do I hang out with these people? Like, because it happened to us in one of our games. We've talked about it a few times where some of the players opted to play, you know, on that chaotic neutral to evil kind of spectrum. And, you know, they had their own personal selfish reasons to be in the group or tolerated the group to what effect. And there were a couple characters that kind of, I guess, gelled the party together somehow. I don't really understand how, but there was a scene that occurred and one of the characters died, and that was the end of the party. Like the rest of the party was like, well, I'm out. You know, so it was a really fragile party. Like, so like we learned very quickly after that. You know, like, hey, the next time around, let's not let that happen again. Why do our characters hang out? Why do they, you know, think this or that about each other? You know, can we get along? Yes. Okay, cool. That's the party. You know? Like, have you ever run into something like that where you saw characters just like clash, but not in like a purposeful, like the two players decided we're going to have this dynamic, but just like they clashed?
That's a really interesting thing that I don't know that I have. I've been pretty lucky, like, because I was playing with the same group of guys for so long in my, history of playing. If we had a character we didn't like, we would just scrap it and make a new character and just work them into the story. Like that didn't matter to us so much. And then now that I've been in a game, so I've been in a game where there was a little bit of like inter-character conflict. Or tension. Yeah, I'm not sure. And that was interesting. That did sort of like disintegrate the game, which was really weird. Yeah.
So it wasn't intentional. Like the two players hadn't said like, "Hey, this is our dynamic. That we are purposely doing this because it's creating more story." Because like I could sit across from Dustin and say, "Let's have characters that butt heads," and like if we're on the same team, same page of like that's our dynamic. I think that could be a really good story, and I think it could really work. But I think if one person's doing it and the other person doesn't know what's happening, or is not on board, that just goes to shit. You know?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
If you want the cool like Cyclops Wolverine headbutt factor, like both people have to be into it, or one person's just getting abused. Essentially, is what it kind of boils down to.
Yeah, it's absolutely, and it's also a factor. I think. Oh, sorry about that. I didn't mean to hit the mic. I think it's also a factor of like you said earlier, Dustin, about like sort of the caliber and quality of the DM or GM. So like this thought's been in my mind a little bit because it seems like we started talking about it more as ourselves as players, but I think it's also important to look at for our characters, like growth and maturing and this sort of theme or topic, right? So like if you make a character, you start out, even if you start out first level, fifth level, whatever, do you have a path? Do you have a goal? Do you have an objective? Like what is your character trying to accomplish? And independent of that, regardless of what their goals are, what are the lessons they're learning along the way? How is that developing the character? How is it changing them? How is it growing them? Is it making them recede into themselves, or is it making them come out? Is it making them step up, or be the leader, or run away and become a coward, or what have you? And then when you have those kind of moments of like, there were one of the characters in the game I'm thinking about, one of the characters had a sort of hot button issue, right? Okay. And by that I mean like something that might trigger people, right? And so they had written it into their background, so the DM was sort of aware of it. It was one of the underlying themes of the game. Okay. But I think what sort of happened was it got to a point where it was too intense. Like some of what was happening was just too intense for some of the players, but also for the DM. And so it sort of like, it wasn't like an aggressive thing. It wasn't necessarily like conflict per se. Right. Inter-party conflict, but it was more of this sort of thing of like the personality of one of the characters was like almost too hard edge, or I don't know if that's the right way to say it.
Just wasn't fun anymore.
Yes,
that's exactly what it boils down to. Is what you're dancing around here. I think we're gonna get to. It hit a point where it wasn't any fun anymore. And once it hits a point, it's not fun anymore. If it ain't fun for the GM, if it ain't fun for the player, then that's when that character just probably needs to be retired. Pick up something new, fresh, and just go deal with the bringing in the new character, all the stuff that comes with that sometimes, and just go through that and just get it out of there. Like,
I think what happened was that now that you reflect that back to me, that's exactly what happened. The DM was trying to facilitate a story where this character was able to grow and heal. And the player was, I think, resisting it.
I see.
Like in a game, like one way to think of a campaign, even though a campaign might play out over a year or more, months, weeks, years, right? In a sense, it's a contracted lifetime.
Oh, for sure.
Like it's compressed, right? So I feel like you need to be willing to let things accelerate, to let things move quickly. And now that I'm reflecting on it, I bet that's what happened, is that the player didn't want to move too far too fast, maybe, or something like that. And sort of like when the DMs started presenting these opportunities for the healing of the player's character, the player like pushed back. Was like, no, I'm not ready for that, or something. Like, oh no, my character isn't ready to come to, to forgive and forget. Let's say it that way.
I see.
And it's like, oh, and then like you said, Dustin, it became unfun.
Yeah, it's tricky because, it may still be fun to that player, but not to the group, or the DM.
We saw that a lot with Larp.
Yeah, a lot of times.
It was a bigger deal with Larp. We had like 50 players. There would frequently be one player. Well, because, and part of it was the nature of Vampire. We talked a lot about this last week, but we have 50 players and 6 STs, and the basic idea there is nobody willingly starts over a new character at LARP. They have to pretty much die or be ran out of town in order to find them making a new one. So you play it till the wheels fall off for the most part. But a lot of people would bring in part of their character concepts that could be extremely uncomfortable to other people at times.
Yeah.
And that character wasn't going away till they got axed, pretty much. Like, so there had to be some talk sometimes, things like that.
Big time.
That's a little different scenario. But at a table, it's much more controllable by the GM, even 5 or 6 players a lot of times. And if one is pushing a narrative that's disruptive to the rest of the table or even to themselves, where it gets to be no fun. Cut that one player out, come up with a new character, introduce it, and go on from there.
Looks
That
like
makes
Discord
sense.
was giving us a little fit there for a second.
Yeah, I see it's
Yeah,
kind of blinking
I
out a
follow
little
what-
bit.
Hopefully
I
that's not
follow what
becoming
you're
a thing.
saying, though.
Yeah,
That's one of the things I never got experience with is I haven't done a LARP. I probably would have loved it, but it
They're
just
great.
never came up in my
They can be.
experience, and it was never something I was sort of drawn to. I had heard about it, and I'm like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. Maybe I'll try it sometime. But
it's a different
never got
beast
to it.
just because, we talked earlier about the dynamic at your table, that these people, you've built trust with these people. And when you're looking at like 5 to 8 people, okay, sure, you can build that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But in a LARP setting, even if you have been established in a LARP for quite a while, there's still
always
pockets
new
of people
people
that you're not going to have any
Yeah.
history with. And they have no history with you, and they don't care about you.
People from other games and everything else too. Yeah, I mean, it was always, you never knew who you were dealing with on any given night. So
And
I
it was
think you guys
community.
are really lucky for having that experience because
We are.
you sort of got to deal with a lot of the issues that are sort of in the community now where people are discussing of things like, like all the rules, which are fantastic, like for, the social dynamic and for
Yeah.
the contract and safety tools and all these kind of things. Like, because we were buddies that met in high school, it never came up. Like,
Yep.
it was never an issue.
came up.
But
Because if
now-
somebody didn't fit in, they just didn't come to the next game.
Yeah, exactly.
Like they found their own way out.
Yep. Yeah, it's
Exactly.
we didn't feel that way at the time, or, oh my God, this situation's coming up. But, in hindsight, we're able to have a show like this because of all these crazy, nonsensical things that occur that you look at and you go, man, well, we probably could have done that better, or, hey, thanks for that follow there, Vaclam. So you got these things like these bad situations, like players really it comes down to players not respecting one another. Yeah, and not respecting each other's time, and not approaching a game cooperatively. I think that's what it really
Totally.
comes down to. Because, I think if there's any lesson that should be absorbed by a person, it's to understand the nature of the game is cooperative, and to do what you can to make sure that you're spending time number one, energy number one, on making sure that the other people at the table are having as much fun as they can. And then look at your own.
Yeah.
I think that makes all the difference. Do all the preparation that makes the job for the DM easy. Do the stuff that makes it easy for the other players to roleplay. Do the stuff that makes it so they can have a good time when combat comes up. Figure out ways to make sure that other people are having a great time and they're going to want to play with you. And you're going to have a lot more fun
Totally.
as a result because the energy at the table is going to be better. The mood's going to be up. The dynamic's going to be there. You're going to have somebody to riff off of, because they're going to want to riff with you.
Absolutely. How do you guys, have you ever done things like, I don't know how Zweihander works, so I really want to check it out, but like, have you tried any of the systems where character creation is like almost entirely random?
Yeah, that's exactly as White Handed.
I don't like those at
Oh,
all.
it is.
Exactly as
I mean-
oh yeah.
I have
love
mixed
it.
feelings on it. In some cases, I like it a lot, and in most cases, I dislike it profoundly.
Dungeon Crawl Classics is that way. Everything's random. It's, in my opinion, it's basically dumping out a puzzle box on there and looking at the box, but you don't have the box to look at, and you just get all the pieces that you're given, and then you make a picture out of it. You just take those pieces and you just start putting them together till you have something to work with, and you figure out what it is. And it's been really cool watching my players, and I have a whole range in my Zweihander game of someone, this is the first time they've ever played a tabletop role-playing game at all. No Dungeons and Dragons experience, no nothing experience. Zweihander is their first time ever playing a game. And I have some people who I've LARPed with and who I've played with before for years, and I know that they can handle their stuff. I have the entire range in this game, and it's been great watching them slowly pick up who their character is over the course of 8 to 9 sessions and really hone in on it versus where they were at session number 1.
That's awesome.
They're leveling up, and they're spending their experience points to buy things right now. And one of the players messaged me today. He's like, I decided I'm going to buy this and this because my character is reluctantly starting to realize he's the leader of this group.
Nice.
So
Awesome.
he's starting to make these decisions now based on where he's found his niche in the game. And it all started with a completely randomly rolled generated character.
Yeah, before I get into the details of my thoughts, what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you like the random?
I just wanna
stories
try
of
it.
characters. So you haven't really done it.
We did this fun thing. One of the things when I so before I actually started really taking over as DM for the group that we now play Thursday nights, I had thrown in a one shot idea, and we just messed around with that. But then one of the other players was like, "Hey, what if we did a totally random game?" And we're like, your race is random, your class is random, and that we're like, okay, let's give it a try, and it was interesting. I feel like that's sort of what I love about this concept or this topic as a whole. Like, to me, character creation it's so much of the fun of playing these games for me is the character creation. And
me too.
honestly, what you just said, Dustin, about your player makes me think that I don't think character creation stops when when session 1 starts.
Even if you do a point buy, in 5e or Pathfinder or First Ed, I haven't tried Second Ed yet. It's still sitting there behind me on the shelf. You can see it there behind me. The first 4 to 5 game sessions, you're still figuring out who your guy is, who your character is, one way or the other. Like, I had a really good idea who I thought Bowron was when I started him, but he's developed over time. Some of it intentionally, some of it because the game required it a bit. Once I met the other players and not the players, but the characters and stuff, I had to mold a little bit about who he is over time. But, I didn't know. I had a lot of his basic stuff kind of down at game 1, but not necessarily all of it. And I think that's the same thing I'm seeing with my Zweihander players too. Like, they got all these things rolled, and it's this big mesh of words and adjectives and descriptions and things you would never come up with on your own about your character. And that's the beauty of the random, is that you're going to get something you would have never created, not in a million years, and then figure out what to do with it.
Yeah, I think that can be a fun thing here and there. Like, I know when we first started Third Ed for the first time, I randomly generated class in race, and just seeing what could happen. How do I deal with this weird hodgepodge of traits? How do I make a story out of these elements? That can be fun, and I have enjoyed that. But I am very interested, like you said, in character creation. I love the process. I love sitting down and thinking, what do I want to get out of this? What is the story I'm trying to tell? What are the themes I'm trying to address? What sorts of problems do I want this character to have? Where do I see it going? I want to engineer that. I want to set it up and be like, oh, I predict that, somewhere down the road, something is going to happen around this segment of details. And I'm really excited about that, that kind of stuff. And when it comes to the sheet in terms of the rules or the game side of things, I guess, I enjoy the game, so I like tinkering. I like, getting under the hood and being like, oh, I can't wait till this comes online because this is going to be really fun. I can't wait to see it work, or fail or whatever. So for me, if all that was made as random checks, what feat do I have? What attributes do I have where? For me, that would devalue that experience a little bit.
Yeah, and that's where something like Zweihander, I think, does get it right, is that you start out with this random ball of nonsense in a way. And what I did with my characters, we had a session 0, they rolled their characters. Next session was 2 weeks later. I was like, take these details that you now have on your character sheet, write me a background. Who is this person? Figure it out from here. And then knowing well that now that they're hitting intermediate tier, they're getting to make those under the hood decisions. My character's a sellsword. Now you get to pick your profession from here on out. Now you get to decide what am I buying? What am I going to do? What part do I want to focus on? But you've had all these other game sessions to slowly let that character marinate to where you know who they are before you get to make that crucial now decision of where you're going from here.
Mm-hmm.
And you've had role play and story happen, and now you get to make that decision. Whereas if you're making it all up front and then the story doesn't become the kind of story you thought it was going to be, because sometimes that happens a lot.
Oh yeah, totally.
Then
Boy,
now your character's like, well, I had this really cool idea and I had this really cool concept, but this is not the game for it, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're stuck because there's no ability to reroute. And that's what I do like about kind of the way and you see that with Dungeon Crawl Classics as well. We played through that funnel. I was an Elven Glassblower and kind of a comic relief character, although I was like one of the more badass characters apparently stat-wise. I didn't know it when I started. But by the time we were done, that character was a fleshed out person. If we were starting level 1 after that, I died at the very, very end. Spoilers. But if he had lived, now I know exactly who he is. He moves into level 1 profession. Now I have this really good idea who he is because I role-played him for 3 hours. Now I can better attribute the other stats and stuff to him. So to me, you get to the same spot. It's a question of what is your process of wanting to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I never did it in the past, but I've found that the session zeros help a lot for that. And I'm kind of excited because we're trying something interesting with our Wednesday night game, with the Star Wars game.
Okay.
We did a mini arc, right? And it was everything about it's been crazy because we had 2 games that were sort of loosely connected where not really necessarily opposing each other, but like 2 crews were basically heading in the same direction and things were interacting, where like what we did had some effect on the other crew and what they did had some effect on ours. We finished that arc, or it's wrapped up now more or less, and there's one more session for the other crew. Wednesday night this week, we're going to do a 0.1 is what we're calling it, which is to say we're coming back together, our crew, and we're going to talk about like, what do we want to do with our character? Because now we're probably going to move into more like sandbox, like broader arc kind of thing. And what do we want to do with our character? Are we happy with the character so far? Is there changes that we want to make to the character? And I thought like, wow, what a cool way to approach character creation, as like you play the character for a handful of sessions, in this case 6, and then you all come together at the table and say like, okay, let's check in. How's it going for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
And you can decide like, this isn't how I thought it was going to work. And then the GM and the player can work something out, makes shifts, or you can just do a whole new character.
Yeah. You know what would be
I
kind of
think as a
interesting?
group of friends, we do that a lot without officially calling them sessions.
Yeah,
we just
we do.
hop online and talk to each other about stuff.
I think one interesting approach, we haven't done it this way, but it would be really interesting to do like a session 0, like a level 0 kind of situation. You trot out your personalities. Your characters do some little tiny mission together or have just a day in the life kind of scene. And then you go back and you do a little like after game breakdown, like, okay, what do we think? And then you fast forward time to when the game starts. So now there's time where you can make adjustments, you could pick your class. So how did your character change from that scene to the start of adventuring? You know, you guys already have some rapport. Maybe you were just like, I don't know, villagers together, you know, hanging around the pub, that kind of thing. Maybe you were classmates or whatever. But now you have this like baked in relationship. You have the chance, like we said, to kind of trot out those characters, feel them out, live. And then you're making the mechanical choices. And now you're coming back and be like, oh, wow, we're different now. Okay, how do we gel now that we've got these extra things layered on? And I think that would be a really kind of a cool way to approach it. You know, a different way of doing it than we meet up at a bar and take our mission and go to the dungeon, you know? So, I don't know, like, have you ever done something in that level or like that style, or anyone in the chat done something like that?
Not that I can recall. Like I said, this is kind of the first time we're really doing it, or I'm doing anything where it's sort of like a midstream check-in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't think of anything that we've done like that before.
It's interesting. I don't know. I would be kind of interested in doing that. I might do that. Not with this next game I'm going to run because it's going to be just a module. But I think when I start an actual campaign afterwards, I think I might try that. I think that would be really interesting. Just to kind of give players a chance to do something a little different. Think a little bit more about more the person and less about the class and race combos. And like the party roles and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's almost like doing sort of a 0 level thing. Mm-hmm. It sounds like a little bit.
Where you level 0 gameplay. Yeah. Maybe
to get a sense of like who are these individuals, and then you start layering on the statistics and the abilities and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's how I approach all my characters. So it'd probably be a lot like what I already do.
Oh, cool.
But it would
it's so funny. I like I was saying earlier, I think I come at this from so many different directions, and it really depends on, do I know the DM, like you were saying, Dustin, or is this a one shot? Because if it's a one shot, I'm gonna maybe do something very unusual. I think one of the things that's really fascinating, and I feel like I heard, Jeff, I think I heard you talking about it with one of the other guests in one of the early shows.
Okay.
Is to go, like, when we start out as players, we tend to create characters that are either a very idealized version of who we think of ourselves or something, or who we wish we were. Or we just play someone who, like, the personality is close to who and how we are. And then you maybe move into after you've got some experience, you move out and you branch out and you try some more things that are a little farther afield. But I love this idea that you sort of put out of, like, and I don't know that I've tried this, to be honest, which is probably why I'm kind of thinking about it or curious about it, is like creating a character who's very much different than you are as a person. So that you could just try on those other shoes.
Yeah, it makes a big difference, because the big part of it for me, for new players, is that everyone wants to retreat to that comfort zone of me. I know me, but the problem with me is that there's too much bleed, emotional bleed. So what happens to my character happens to me. The way that you're reacting is reacting to me. If I make a mistake, it's I made the mistake, not my character. And I feel like when you get a character that's very different from you, whether that's style, class, personality, just the way they think, it lets you have an excuse to say, like, hey, that's not me. I'm putting on a different character right now. And whatever happens, that's happening to that character. I'm just as shocked as you are what this character is doing. I'm discovering it just the same way that you guys are. It's doing things I wouldn't have thought of, and that's when you really, I think, get role-playing. Like, it clicks, and you get to a more comfortable spot where you're not worrying so much, am I going to sound stupid? Am I going to come up with a bad idea? It doesn't fucking matter, Right.
Totally.
Yeah, I think that, for me anyway, I guess I can only speak from my personal experience, but I feel like I can push my character to be quite a bit different than me, personality-wise, but I usually always have one part of their personality that anchors back to me. And
that's cool.
That just helps me always keep kind of like a pipeline into who that character is. It gives me like that avenue to get into that person from me. Like it's my secret door into being that particular character, so that my characters don't become erratic from game to game, especially with so much time between. It keeps them. I don't want to use the word grounded, because that's not the word I'm looking for. Consistent is the word I'm looking for. That way I can always get back to that person.
Yeah.
My LARP character, awesome. Landon Kane, was my jealousy.
Hey, thanks for the follow.
He was based from my envy and my jealousy. So I could always use my envy and my jealousy as a channel to get into Landon Kane. I could do it today if I needed to, because I can always pull back to that no matter how long it's been since I played him last. So there's those parts of me that I can pull to that help me get to that point. And it's not me, but there's a small part of me in it.
And that's an interesting thing. I like to play up on those things sometimes. Like you can explore elements of yourself in your characters, and a lot of people do that. But you can do it in a way that isn't directly personal. It isn't exactly you. So you can get at things that are maybe complicated or difficult or uncomfortable from a position where it's more comfortable, maybe like we've talked a lot about leveling up as a person through gaming, like you could practice skills. Like I'm not a person who likes to talk in front of crowds, believe it or not. I was terrified of that when I was younger. Stage fright is a real thing for me. But, you find me up here doing this now. Where did I get that? I got it from gaming. Like I literally made characters who were social.
Only reason he makes it through this is because he only sees 3 of us on the screen.
Maybe, I don't know.
The other 18 people watching, he doesn't see them.
Yeah, but
So you mentioned an anchor, Dustin, and that's your way to get like into character, or at least I love that idea of being consistent.
To me, it's a personality thing. The same way that like when we talk about voices, people who do voices will say they have one line that gets them into the voice. Like Jeffrey, if he wants to go to Skeezer, he has to say Fulcrum's name. That's how he gets into. That's how he gets into Skeezer voice. He has to say Fulcrum for the first time, then he can go.
Yep.
For me, it's the same thing, just on a personality level.
So it reminded me of something I thought about as I was kind of just, thinking about this topic in general, and I realized that it's almost like getting into character like an actor might do. So one of the things we can do for creating a character, and I know you've had another guest, at least one, possibly 2 of your other guests have talked about, you can create like, either you can do something physical like a prop, like an article of clothing, a pair, spectacles or a pipe or what, anything like ears or whatever it is. Or you can also sort of create like a mannerism, or like, you hunch your shoulders, or you do something physical with your body to adapt to like bring the character to life.
Yeah.
And I love what you said about the anchor as far as how it connects to your personality. Like that really makes a lot of sense to me. And I absolutely love that. And it just totally tied into what, whereas I had thought like, well, make it something physical. I love the idea that you just shared with me about making it something that's ingrained in.
It became something that I realized I needed when I started LARPing. Because with LARP, and to get exactly what you're talking about, and Jeff knows this because he saw the character, I had a specific shirt and a specific hat that I wore as Landon Kane.
Sure.
And it was like putting on the uniform.
Yeah, totally.
Like you put on the uniform when you go to LARP, suddenly you walk into the doors, you put on the uniform, and next thing I know, I'm basically running around on all 4s, leaping up onto chairs like a wild animal because I was a gangrel. That's what I did. Growling at people, snarling at people, sniffing people's butts as they walk by. Whatever I could do to make people realize I was an animal, I pretty much did it. But it took usually playing a song or 2 on the way there to get me in the right mindset, and to put on that hat and the flannel shirt to really become that character. And then the moment I was able to take the hat and the shirt off, I went back to just being me again. We go sit at the restaurant, have a good time. And I always found like that I needed that to help get me in, like maybe method acting is what it is.
Yeah, get in and out.
So when I'm sitting down at a table, I have problems doing that if I don't give myself that same way of getting in, but without the hat and everything else, I don't need that part of it. So
yeah, I think that kind of, maybe it's not obvious on the surface, but I think that is a bit of armor, right? So like you're putting on a costume, you're putting on a voice, you're putting on things that separate you from your character, and it lets you get into that and say, that's my character doing that. And it's nice too, because when you finish the game, like you said, you take off the uniform. I'm out of that. Anything that was annoying to that character, anything that was like bad, negative, anxiety, the traumas that may have happened in the game, or the joy or whatever, the feelings that character was holding on to get left there. It's like hanging up the work, outfit and sitting on the couch and cracking open a beer. You're done for the day. And I think it's really important. People need to give themselves that.
And then if your character does meet some untimely fate, like it's still sad. Like you don't want to lose your character, but yet it still happens.
Sure.
But it's not, you're not losing really a part of you, because that part's still there. Like even though Landon's dead, He's died twice actually, but because
Magic.
the game rebooted, I got to play him again.
Right.
But nonetheless, like, you know, I could still slip back into him today if I needed to.
We have a question from Joker here. So Joker wants to know, how do you deal when your character follows certain philosophies? Now, I'm not exactly sure what you're getting at with that in particular, but let me see the follow-up thing here. There's a lot of text happening all of a sudden. Let's see.
Yeah, it's awesome. The
During
chat's been
mysticism and
great.
culture- Yeah, it really has.
Just for the chat, just remember that if you have them available, please use the little the cams at the bottom so highlight your question so we make sure we see it. It
So-
just helps us make sure we don't miss a question.
Yeah, and if
Maybe
you do spend
before
that-
we take that question,
Yeah.
I do want to tie up one last thought that
Mhm.
ties into what you were just saying, Jeff, and that is about like when your character when you start experiencing thoughts and feelings that are your character's thoughts and feelings and not necessarily your own, or at least they're different enough from the normal thoughts and emotions that you experience that you recognize like, oh wow, this is new.
Yeah.
The first time I finally kind of got that from a game was back in, again, to tie it back to this Icespire Peak game that I mentioned. I was the first time in video games, I'll play female characters, male characters, whatever. But it was the first time in a role-playing game, a TTRPG or D&D game, where I actually decided to play a female character. And she was the first Warlock that I played, because I finally found a sort of patron and like a build that I kind of could connect with and didn't feel like creeped out by, I guess. And it was so fascinating. I created such an unique character, and then doing everything I could to put myself in the shoes of a woman who was from another part of the world, quote unquote, because she was from the other side of Faerun, right? And then she's this warlock. So there were things. So what you said, Dustin, about having anchors really fascinates me, because there were things that I created about her personality and some of her powers and her magic that are anchors for me. I never would have thought of it that way, but that's exactly what they were. Even though this character was so sort of, in my mind, kind of far removed from who I am. Like I speak fast. I talk high energy and all this. She was totally the opposite. Very slow tempo, I played it that way because I'm thinking, okay, she speaks another language. So so what is it about the way she talks that's different from everybody else? Well, she needs to take her time with the language. And I added these mannerisms to make it as much different as I could. And I genuinely had a couple of experiences where I was like, whoa, I felt what this character was feeling. Not what Gregory was feeling, but what this character would feel in this moment. It was such a cool experience.
So just to get back to this
Joker's question here.
That was a great point, by the way.
Times.
It was awesome.
Yes.
How do you handle characters that are into certain philosophies? Like, I'm into mysticism, occultism in real life, a chaos magician. After I played Magi Ascension, some ideas kept lingering, some concepts and whatnot. So it sounds like Joker's talking a little bit about maybe some bleed, where things that happen through the game have stuck with him over time. That could be part of the learning and growing experience that Jeff has mentioned about leveling up as a person. Some of it just could be depending on how it stuck with you, I guess. Because I don't want to say that if it was stuck in a bad way, you could say that you had some sort of traumatic experience in this way, or that it's challenged your belief structure in a way that's shaken, what your worldview is as a person. Sometimes that's maybe a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing, I guess, depending on how it's come about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in this case, he's saying he has an interest in these concepts, and then there is a game that explores those concepts, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think there's necessarily a problem with that. It's just one of the beautiful things we touch on this a lot is that games are a safe place to explore. You can look into things, you can make mistakes, you can try stuff that seems weird, and it's an okay place to do it. You know,
Can
what's
I,
the worst
can
that
I
happens?
caveat off of that a little bit?
Sure.
If this is the direction he's going with this, because now I'm rereading it, and now that you're talking, I got a second idea of what maybe he's kind of referring to. Maybe he'll clarify a little bit. As somebody who's a scientist by trade, and somebody who knows a lot about health and the human body, I can tell you right now, laymen suck. They're not going to get it right, man. You go into a game, they're going to get things wrong, and you just have to understand that not everybody has the same level of expertise in that field that you do. So if you're getting into a game that deals a lot with a certain level of expertise and you happen to have it,
Yeah.
just know your GM probably doesn't.
Yep.
And they're trying to make something cool for you.
Yeah.
And you just have to roll with the punches and not get bogged down in the weeds and details of overcomplicating what is otherwise probably a very simple system written by people who did some Wikipedia searches and maybe read a book if you're lucky. So I wouldn't get too bogged down in the details and just have fun exploring kind of the concept and let the GM and the other players learn a little bit about what you know without hammering it down like a rules lawyer without the rules to really back it, I guess. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and if I'm not sure if we're answering the question that you intended, but and if you want to clarify it, go ahead and do that for us to get us in the right direction. But I think some of what you're touching on there is just that you're probably not going to get the in-depth exploration of occultism and mysticism that you're describing in a game session unless all the other players and the DM or GM want to also explore that. That may just be a topic that if you want to get into that, find somebody who's like-minded, sit around and talk about it. I mean,
If a GM is interested, like Judd K there says, offer them resources, and that's totally cool. Just know that like some GMs just are not going to take the time to do any more than what they're already doing.
Yeah.
They're not experts on everything. They don't have a lot of intention usually to become an expert on any particular topic that's out of their normal realm of this is what I actually do to make a living sort of deal. So, and that's just kind of sometimes just the rub of it.
I think that speaks to how we relate with other players too, because like one person's version of magic might be totally different than another person's, and the way they describe how their spells work or something like that. And I think like letting it be okay is fine. And I absolutely agree as well with like the level of knowledge that one person to the next has. And even another level of it is just the way people say things. Like our language, I would say tomato, right? So people are going to say things in a certain way, and like being okay with that makes the games, in my experience, way more fun and more enjoyable, because you're not getting bogged down by little minutia things. Whereas if it's important to someone, that's awesome. Let them have that. Let them run with it. If it's not important to you, okay, let it go.
It goes back to what you said earlier about like the spear pole arm. It's just reskinning. If you could take your mythos and reskin it onto what are like standard D&D spells, if you have scry, like I get scry next level as Bowron, and I have yet to figure out what scry for him is going to look like. I just haven't thought. I know we talked about it way early in the game because we needed scry, and now that we don't, we're not going to have it. But so I haven't figured out what that's really going to be for Bowron. He's not a crystal ball type. Maybe he's the throw the bones and read it type. I don't know, but I'll come up with something for him down the road. But at the moment, like I can reskin scry to a way that's going to fit this pirate druid. And I can figure out how that's going to work. And it can look through a lot of different mythos and a lot of different religions. There's a lot of different ways I can go about doing scry if I want to. I just have to find one that's going to fit me right. But functionally, it's going to do what scry says it's going to do. Nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah.
And
it kind of touched more on this.
I want to answer Art of Bartlett's question.
Oh, okay.
Art of Bartlett is a good friend. He is an amazing artist. If you don't know him already, please check out what he does. Cool. He asked, what characters have you played that you could drop into character at any time? Pretty much all of the characters I've created, I probably could. Even the ones that are like, I haven't played for 15 or 20 years, just because I kind of got so used to them. Like, I have a bard that in a second I could, I might have to practice like you do, where you say a few words or a few sentences to get the accent or the voice right. But as far as the attitude and the personality, most of them.
Yeah, a lot of them. Mostly my LARP characters, just because you're forced to have so many angles of attack on those. There's a
characters that we get to play for years. Like I played Landon Kane for 5 years.
Yeah,
like 5 years of every other weekend being the same character. Like you get to where you know that person pretty well. Like, you know, so definitely him and Bishop Grimes. I can definitely do Grimes at the drop of a hat if I need to. Yeah, I'm definitely, because I'm currently playing in Bowron's an easy one. I can always slip kind of into Bowron mode if I want to.
Yes, my current character Skeezer would be an easy one. Most of my LARP characters, you know, I would say slipping back into my super paranoid, terrified, cative Brian would have been pretty easy to get back into. I think
the early characters, because they were so spot on cliche, would be easy. Like I can slip back into Zen because
awesome.
he was pretty vanilla paladin. So like it's easy to do the cliche vanilla type characters. Like those are easy to get back into.
I think Oleg may be my easiest character to get into. Like that one is, there's just so much going on with that dude that like it's so easy to fall into that one. That was probably one of my favorite characters. There's a lot more we could probably get into, but we actually have hit our 2-hour mark. I am kind of blown away by that. There was more I wanted to talk about, but
I was curious if we were going to extra innings tonight.
I'm down. I mean,
Jeff moved to the Eastern time zone, so it's pushing 1 a.m. for him. So I'm feeling we're not getting any extra innings out of him. But hold on, we got a highlighted
question here from Joker.
Yeah. Or is it a comment? I'm not sure. There's a question in there. Okay.
Yeah, so depicting things. Okay, so like World of Darkness runs into this a lot. So Joker's asking about how do you deal with depictions of, let's see how we want to phrase this, depictions of bigotry and racism in games that use those as tropes. So like World of Darkness games in particular run afoul of this a lot with skinheads, neo-Nazis, Klansmen. There's a lot of these baked in nasty.
They're baked in real world ones. That's where I think the difference is, because if you said to me, hey, elves and dwarves hate each other, we go, yeah, of course. What about it? If you said, hey, there's a natural, you get an extra +2 if you're a dwarf to kill a goblin, you're like, yeah, of course I do. It's awesome. Like it's been that way for several editions. Like, what are you talking about? That's normal. That's still at the very core of the xenophobic type stuff that you're seeing. D&D just found a way to gloss it over because it's not based upon real life trauma and tragedies of our actual real life past. World of Darkness gets into trouble because it'll let you delve right into the sad, sorry history of a lot of crap that's gone down in this country and around the world, and on levels that people do not necessarily want to get into.
And like most forms of entertainment, they can fly into it and get it really wrong, or they can get it right, and it's really important when they do. Like if you look at a movie like American History X, right? Like they did a really good job of depicting bigotry and racism because of the care that they took with it and like how they framed it. And I think if you're going to do that with your group, the first and foremost, you need to sit down and talk with your group and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking I'm going to put in. Should I hand wave this? Should I fade to black? Or are you guys okay with and interested in exploring these topics? And if the answer isn't an emphatic yes, then it's a no. You just skip it over.
Remember earlier, Jeff, when I said that you don't necessarily need a session 0?
That's session 0.
That's when you're playing standard fantasy games. If you're going to delve into something that personal, that like trigger word like going on, now you need a session 0. You can't just walk up to the table with a bunch of players and be like, all right, guys, today we're playing this, and then be like, what? Like it now you have to find players that are down for that. And that's why it always worked for Vampire and LARP in particular, was because those players came to that game knowing it was World of Darkness, knowing that the point of World of Darkness is not to be a hero, it's not to win, it's to explore the deeper, darker parts of our nature until our character literally is destroyed by it. And so if you're going to play a character in the World of Darkness that has these issues, be it bigotry, racism, the point is to make that a crux by which they destroy themselves. Never is it a positive force in their life. It only brings upon more and more of their ruin and drives them to the point of destruction. The same way you could say that about alcohol or drugs, any addictions, whatever it is, any of the vices they might have on their sheet. This is just one of the vices under wrath that they took, and that wrath is ultimately their destruction, because that's the point of the world of darkness, is to watch your character slowly fall to oblivion. And that's why it's the one game system, in my opinion, that you can throw those kinds of concepts into and explore them in a way that doesn't give them power, but
if
to
you're
destroy
careful.
the person that embodies them. If
you're really careful. And this goes back to your earlier question. We're going to open this can of worms. It'll give me another 2 hours of conversation. But your earlier conversation about ideologies and philosophies kind of bleeding back and forth. I think this is also why it's really important when you're making a character, particularly in a modern setting, that has a religious view that is personal to you. You need to be aware of how that's going to feel and what exploring that is going to be like in a game setting where the other person may be looking at it from a game stance, whereas you're looking at it from a personal stance. So, like, be very mindful of that. So, like, if your spiritual views or kind of the mysticism and occultism, the way people treat that in a game may have real ramifications to you outside of the game. Like, you may have feelings that kind of erupt from that. Same thing as, somebody talking about Judaism or Catholicism or I don't know, whatever else people might be into. So just be mindful of that. We get away from that a lot with, fantasy tropes because, like, nobody's worshiping, I don't know, Bahamut or something, I mean, probably somebody is, but, typically that's not what's going down.
You still have to be careful because a lot of this stuff is still mimicked off of actual religions. Like, they pull a lot of how you do it from those things. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's reskinned at best. Or loosely stolen at worst.
All right. So,
and it all comes back to like your levels of trust and everything like that, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like it raises an interesting question across any game. Like, do you put when we're doing our character creation, we talked about how 5e implemented this new system of like your personality traits, right? Wasn't in any of the earlier systems, but some of us still were putting in, like, I'm focusing in on the flaw, right? Well, what if the flaw was some kind of a, how do I want to say it? Like a challenge. A real challenge for this character that you're going to sort of explore, whether it's a physical challenge or a social, emotional, what have you. Those are choices that you can make, but if you're going to make those, the respectful and, like, let's say the correct etiquette for that is to check in with everyone else at the table. You don't just drop those bombs because that's like... That's such a level of chaos that you're pretty much ensuring you're going to offend or hurt or upset someone. Chances are.
Even not that, you're still going to nudge them on an emotional level in some way. Fair. Even on a minor scale, it's still something you want to check in on.
Yeah.
It's a really important point. Man, I want to keep talking, but we should really wrap this up. I got con season coming up starting this week, and I got to get ready to go to bed. So yeah, we're in the waning overtime here. So why don't we go ahead and make sure we plug what you're up to there, Gregory. So why don't you tell them where to find your stuff, tell them a little bit about it, give them a little taste so that we can get our audience who's still hanging with us to go that way.
Yeah, I love bringing things full circle. So sort of at the beginning of this episode, this show, this chat we've just had, I was talking about like how I got into Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing games. And a few years ago, I started getting into YouTube and making YouTube videos. And then I decided I wanted to start streaming and all of that. And I kind of did, but wasn't really happy with it. But then at the end of 2018, somewhere around October, I got really serious about it. And I'm like, I'm going to make a YouTube channel that's all about D&D and RPGs. And somewhere between then and the beginning of January last year, 2019, I realized, you know what? I'm going to do a daily vlog.
Nice.
And so it was It was crazy. It was such an undertaking. I changed. We talk about growth for our characters. Like I, as an individual, changed and grew immensely because of this commitment I made to myself, and then following through that. So, like, I found all kinds of crazy topics to discuss that some were just timely because, there was an announcement of such and such game or such and such show. Some of them were reaction things. Like I'd find out about you guys or something and say like, oh, hey guys, go check this out, or go check out this new tool. Roll20 did this, or there's a new map tool or whatever.
Much appreciated, by the way.
You bet. So like I realized about partway through the year, I wanted to start reaching out and getting involved with other individuals in the community, because I really believe that the best way to succeed is to like lift other people up, right?
Absolutely.
And it gave me all kinds of great topics to talk about.
Yep.
So I started playing. I wanted to play more games, and I started doing that. I got in with a couple of amazing people. I actually was on variant roles, but they're sort of going away, unfortunately. Then I was trying to do encounter roleplay, but that didn't happen, which is fine. I did end up connecting with One Crit Wonder and having some great opportunities there. And so I got into more of the online game, of the production of it, of being a personality or a character or whatnot. So the streaming got me into the bug. So where I'm at right now is this. Every other Wednesday, we're playing Tabletop Galaxy, which is a Star Wars RPG that we're playing using the Fantasy Flight games. And that is on Tabletop Galaxy. You can find us on Twitter and YouTube. And then I do my own videos. Once I got to 365 for the D&D Daily vlog, I needed to take a break so I could, I have a life, I have a wife and a son, so I need time for that. I'm still making the videos. I'm putting a little more effort into getting some actual play stuff because I'm streaming on Mondays on Twitch. We're playing the Princes of the Apocalypse. It's a fun group of guys, and we just have a good time. So this year, I'm definitely going to continue the daily vlog. I would like to do more collaborations like I have done, where I have guests come on and contribute to a vlog where they get to share their thoughts and ideas. Nice. And then it's sort of like I edit it in a way where it's an interplay. Yeah. And yes, please, by all means, I would love to have
just let us know when and where.
Yeah, I'll be there.
I show up.
I appreciate it.
So that's where I'm at, and I want to do more. If you do as Y Hunter game and the timing works, I would absolutely love to be part of it.
If you haven't checked the Discord, it's already on the books for fall 2020 coming up.
Fantastic.
It's already got a title and everything. So
I will see what I can do to be a.
Just to give a little heads up, here's how things work. I give all the chairs to my fellow TT2K members first, and then they opt out, and then I fill in spots, where needed.
Totally,
so that's how things work around here. So they get first option, and I give them a little time to think about it. And then if they don't want in, I start plugging holes with other people. So just keep a lookout, and we'll definitely come back your way.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It sounds like some great stuff.
That's why I'm here. I mean, I love this is my passion. This is it's been a part of my life for the majority of my life, and so I realized I love making videos. I love talking about D&D and RPGs. I love playing them, so that's what I'm going to do. So I'm my YouTube channel and all that. I'm a few away from hitting 250, which is excellent.
Wow.
Nice.
It's
fun to hit those milestones.
Hell yeah, it is.
So yeah, you can always hit me up for a conversation. If you need a player, come find me. If I'm available, I'm happy to do it. And if you have topics that you would love to see explored, I want to put more energy this year, because last year it was just as fast as I could get to it. I had to, because I was doing it every day. So I had to get to a point where my editing was on point, my delivery and all of that. I had to get better and better and faster and faster.
Yeah, when you're editing video, you learn that real quick.
Yeah, I feel a little bad about this one.
I don't do the editing around here, so it's just a problem.
I know. I feel a little bad for Jeff, because I'm thinking where the heck is he going to split this one?
We won't.
He won't.
It'll just go along.
It just
works better this way.
Fair
we've
enough.
been splitting them a long time.
I haven't gotten to that change yet, so I'm something to look forward
You'll
to.
get there soon enough. We hit a couple of where we were just like, there's no good place to split. And then after about 3 or 4 in a row, we were like, just run the 2-hour long format.
Yeah.
It's fine.
People have long
Nice.
attention spans. They don't, but we'll pretend.
Right.
But our audience does.
this
They've been sticking
year-
around.
That's awesome. So, just in conclusion, this year my focus is going to be about creating content that is much more forethought and like. I don't know if I'm going to do scripts per se. That might not be my style, but I really want to put more energy and effort into thinking it through, maybe doing more kind of research kind of thing, and really having solid ideas and concepts in the content, as well as just better filming, better editing, and all of that stuff. So much more to come this year,
That
and
sounds
collaborations
great.
with you guys.
Absolutely. If this conversation's anything to go off of, that's going to be excellent stuff. Like, you're a very interesting person. You're really easy to talk to. So I would definitely recommend our chat. Go check it out. And I think we've tossed your link a couple times out there, but
Yep,
we
it
can pop
is
that
out
out one
there.
more time there, if you wouldn't mind,
Thank you.
mods.
But,
Because
if you're worried about attention spans, as I remind people, there's people who sit down and watch 4 hours of Critical Role.
Mm-hmm.
There's people who sit down and watch 3.5 hours of a Star Wars movie. Like, attention spans are not a problem in 2020.
I think people self-filter down. There may not be in a massive audience, but I think the audience that you find will be a really good audience.
Yeah.
So, Dustin, what are you up to these days?
Well, of course, I'm here Monday nights, 10 p.m. for the wisdom check. Next week, we have BizLab from Notorious DMG, one of my fellow Notorious DMG members. And
Good crew.
he used to be here watching every week, but his work schedule changed, so he doesn't get to watch us live anymore, and he's super sad about it. But he is taking a little time out of his busy schedule to come on next week. We're going to help him. Well, it was the anniversary, I think, was at the end of last year near, but he celebrated 10 years of podcasting his D&D game.
10 years?
10 years.
Holy shit.
Steam,
That's
Steal, and Murder
amazing.
That is
has been
unbelievable.
going online for 10 years.
Wow.
So
Good for him.
you can look forward next week to meeting Bert, who goes by BizLab. If you see him here on Twitch, remember Notorious DMG. He's played every system you can imagine. We're going to have another one of these kind of conversations next week that we are going to start talking about podcasting, and who knows what we're going to be talking about by the time we end. It's
Yeah,
gonna
who
be
knows?
ride. Show up for it. It's going to be fun. Tomorrow night, plug for our guy Cameron here at TT2KB.
Oh, yeah.
Cameron has started a show called Bardic Knowledge.
So
If you
good.
haven't seen it yet, it's him making game music. So if you like music, you want to see some game music getting made. I don't know if he's continuing the more game theme this week or if he's switching to something different. That's kind of up to Cameron, and he'll just tune in and find out what he's doing, because it's all been awesome so far. Wednesday here, 7 Days to Die. I don't know if Cameron knows it yet. He has to start building a new bunker. So tune in and watch all the mayhem ensue for 7 Days to Die on Wednesday. Thursday, Zweihander returns, Terror and Treefell, Chapter 9 of Terror and Treefell. Red Caps, Purple Feathers.
Okay.
That's this
Interesting
Thursday.
title. Provocative.
And then that takes us through the wisdom check next week with BizLab. So
Fantastic. So, that's... It's a full set of things there. I'm in most of those things, so I'm there with the 7 Days to Die. I'll be hanging out in the chat tomorrow for Cam's Bardic Knowledge for sure, which is 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, I believe. I should know
yeah.
the times of our own shows, but
I'm pretty sure you're correct on that.
Yep.
He was going to move it, but then I don't think he did.
Yep. So that one's going to be great. And then coming up soon, we are going to be getting in a convention schedule, and that's why I'm trying to get on a better sleep schedule here. But my dad is an artist. He does 3D artwork. He's the artist David Lee Pancake. And you will see him at pretty much every convention known to man. And I will be going with him pretty much to every convention known to man this year, starting this week. So after playing on Wednesday night, 7 Days to Die, Thursday morning I'm going to be loading up the truck, and we're going to be taking off to Capricorn in Chicago. And so we'll be spending the whole weekend up there. Next weekend after that, we're down in Chattanooga. And then after that is C2E2. And the entire crew here of Tabletop to Keyboard is going to be putting on a panel there about homebrew games. You know, how to make them, how to come up with stories, things that are important to putting those pieces together. So we are officially on for that. So if you're going to be stopping at C2E2 up in Chicago, stop by and say hi. We'll be there. We'd like to meet you guys. And if you are a fan of the show and you want to catch up on what's been going on. Maybe you've missed things live. We've got you covered. So there's YouTube channel, which sounds like somebody's been using. And so go check that out. We've got all the past episodes up there of the Wisdom Check in a playlist. We've also got all of the Zweihander game that Dustin puts on. And we're going to be working on getting the Everstorm 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons game up there soon, with just working on some editing and stuff, and try to make that happen. And we got Bardic Knowledge on there. So we got everything you could want from our channel going up there. 7 Days to Die is probably going to end up there pretty soon. So it all lives there. And then, if that wasn't enough, we got other places where you can find us in podcast form. So you can find us on iTunes, you can find us on Spotify, and iHeartRadio now. So, woo! So, there's no excuse. If you like to listen to this stuff, there's a way to listen to it. And there's also another way to get in contact with us, and that's our Discord. So, I just got linked down there. If you haven't joined that yet, go ahead and pop in there, because we have tons of people, gamers, writers, content creators, artists, just everybody under the sun in there. They're all talking, collaborating, sharing things, promoting. If you got a channel that touches on tabletop role-playing at all, come on in there. We got a promote section. You can put your stuff out there. We'll get you into some rotation, get you some fans. And, we just love doing what you were saying before, raising all tides, So I want to say thank you so very much, Gregory, for coming in and joining us tonight. It's been a treat. And thank you, audience, for coming on this ride with us tonight. It's been wonderful. You've been great. Lots of chatting there. I guess we should be looking to see if there's anyone to raid tonight, because
I'm switching back over to tabletop to keyboard here so that I can take a look.
Awesome. So while you're taking a look at that, so thank you again very much.
Yeah, my pleasure. You guys are awesome. I could talk all night about this stuff.
I think
with
we
you guys.
definitely could have.
Jeff will go to bed, but you can hang out with me here for a bit after we cut loose.
Right on.
Well, it looks like Scraticus is about our only option right now. Everyone else has gone to bed, so
All right.
we'll rate ourselves as Scraticus again this week. I think we rated him last week, but
Yeah, you got there. You want me to do it?
I got it.
Cool. So
You can go ahead and hit the outro if you want to.
I
while the timer
will, I
goes.
think. Let's go ahead and cue that bad boy up. So thank you, folks. Take a little walk with us over to see Scraticus.